Welcome back, Truth Seekers. I'm your host, Josh, and today we're embarking on a journey back in time to explore the very earliest attempts to translate the Bible. We're going to uncover stories behind the first bridges built between these ancient languages and their efforts to make these sacred texts accessible to a wider world. I ask you to be patient with me, as this trip can be a long, boring process, but the destination is well worth the wait. In my Unveiling the Veil series, we're going to dig deep into the modern religious practices of today, like Jehovah's Witnesses, Mormonism, the Roman Catholic Church, and, of course, first on the list will be Christianity, all of its denominations, their doctrinal and theological beliefs, and much more. Trust me, it does get interesting. From visions of angels to modern religions being built off fictional sci-fi books. Truth Seekers, we're about untangling the lies and realigning ourselves with the ultimate truth, Jesus Christ. John 14:6. With that being said, back to the subject. The Bible as we know it is a tapestry, woven from different threads of languages, cultures, and historical context. But the common thread that runs through it all is the desire to understand and share the message of faith, hope, and truth. And from the very beginning, that desire has driven people to translate these texts to make them more understandable for those who spoke different languages. Now imagine trying to translate a complex idea, a deeply spiritual context, from one ancient language to another. It's not about just finding the equivalent words, it's about capturing a nuance and the cultural context and the very essence of the original message. It's a challenge that has occupied scholars and translators for millennia. And it's a challenge that we'll be exploring in depth in this episode. The first translations of the Bible we'll be focusing on are the foundational translations, the ones that laid the groundwork for all that followed. We'll explore the reasons why translations were necessary in the ancient world, examining the language and the cultural landscape of the time. We'll dive into fascinating stories of the Septuagint, the first major translation of the Hebrew Bible into the Greek, and we'll uncover the incredible insight provided by the Dead Sea Scrolls, which shed new light on the text of the Hebrew Bible and its transmission. Our aim, as always, is in the name, to seek truth. By understanding the challenges and the triumphs of these early translators, we can gain a richer appreciation for the Bible and the incredible journey it took to reach us today. We'll be asking questions like, what were the motivations behind these early translations? And what challenges these early translators faced? And how did these translations shape the future of both Judaism and Christianity? So join me, Truth Seekers, as we journey back in time to explore these ancient voices that brought the Bible to the wider world. Let the exploration begin. Now that we've set the stage for our exploration of biblical translation, let's dive deep into the fundamental question: why was the translation necessary in the first place? It's more important than just swapping words from one language to another. It's about bridging cultures, preserving meaning across time and space, and ensuring the message resonates with the diverse audience. I want you to imagine a world without translation. It would be a world of isolated communities, each with its own ideas, stories, and even everyday simple conversations would be limited to those who share the same language. It's like trying to navigate through a foreign city without a map or a phrase book. You might get the general idea, but in the end, you'd miss out on the richness and the detail of that community. And you might end up ordering something you didn't want for dinner. The Bible as we know it is a collection of texts written primarily in three ancient languages: Hebrew, Aramaic, and Greek. Hebrew, the language of the ancient Israelites, forms the foundation of the Old Testament. It's a language rich in imagery, poetry, and complex grammatical structures. Aramaic, a close relative of Hebrew, became a common language of the Middle East during the Persian and later periods. And then there's Greek, which became the lingua franca, common language, of the Mediterranean world during the Hellenistic period. Thanks to Alexander's great conquest, the New Testament, the record of Jesus' life, teachings, and the early Christian church is written in the Greek. This language diversity is the first and most obvious reason for the need for translation. As the Jewish people were being scattered throughout the ancient world during the diaspora, often due to the conquest, exile, or trade, they found themselves living in places where Hebrew was no longer the primary language. They spoke Greek in Alexandria, Aramaic in Babylon, and eventually a multitude of other languages across the vast Roman Empire. If these communities were to continue to have access to their sacred text, translation was not merely helpful, it was absolutely essential. This brings us to the fascinating case of the Book of Enoch. While not included in the traditional Jewish or Protestant biblical canon, it's a valuable example for understanding the complexities of translation and its necessity. Enoch, the great-grandfather of Noah, was a mysterious figure mentioned briefly in Genesis. Enoch walked faithfully with God, and then he was no more, because God took him away. Genesis 5:24. This intriguing verse has sparked much speculation, and the Book of Enoch expands on this brief mention, offering detailed accounts of the Enoch's heavenly journeys and revelations. This intriguing verse has sparked much speculation, and the Book of Enoch expands on this brief mention, offering a detailed account of Enoch's heavenly journeys and revelations. Now here's the translation connection. The Book of Enoch exists in multiple versions and fragments, written in different languages including Aramaic, Greek, and Ge'ez. No, I'm not saying Ge'ez is in Ge'ez, another language, but Ge'ez, an ancient language in Ethiopia. The most complete version that we have today is in Ge'ez, suggesting that its preservation within the Ethiopian Christian tradition. This raises a key question. How did the text supposedly written by a figure from the pre-flood world end up being preserved in Ethiopia? The answer, truth seekers, is translation. Scholars believe the Book of Enoch was originally written in Aramaic or Hebrew, then translated into Greek, and then from Greek it was translated into Ge'ez. Each translation involved not just changing words, but it's also adapting text to different cultural and different language nuances. It's like a game of telephone being played across centuries and continents. The message might change slightly with each retelling, but the core story remains. In Enoch's case, these translations are often our only access to these ancient traditions, as the original Hebrew or Aramaic versions are mostly lost. This illustrates a vital aspect of translation. Sometimes it's the only way we have access to these ancient texts and ideas. Without the dedicated translators who preserve the Book of Enoch in different languages, it would likely be lost to us forever. It highlights the translation's crucial role in preserving our cultural and religious heritage. Beyond the specific case of Enoch, the very nature of language necessitates translations. Languages aren't just collections of words, they reflect cultural and historical and worldviews of the time. A word in one language might not have the perfect equivalent in another. Think of idioms like break a leg. Literally translated, it would be a terrible curse. But in theatrical circles, it's a wish of good luck. These kinds of cultural specific expressions highlight the challenges translators faced. Furthermore, languages evolve over time. Words change, meanings change, and grammatical structures shift. Imagine trying to read Cheshire in its original Middle English language. It's a challenge even native English speakers couldn't do. Now imagine trying to read the Bible in its original Hebrew or Greek without any training. It's clear that translation is necessary to bridge the gap of not only different languages, but over different time periods. Finally, we need to consider the shift from oral tradition to written text. In ancient times, stories, laws, and religious teachings were often passed down orally, memorized, and recited through generations. This was a powerful way to preserve information in pre-light societies. But as literacy increased, the need to write these traditions down became more pressing. The act of writing down oral traditions in itself is a kind of translation. Transferring information from one medium, speech, to another, writing, or even when it's written traditions, variations can creep in as scribes make copies by hand. This sets the stage for our next topic, the Septuagint. Truth seekers, we've established why translation is so vital to the ancient world. Now let's focus on the pivotal moment in biblical translation history, the creation of the Septuagint. This wasn't another translation. It was a watershed event that profoundly impacted both Jewish and Christian history. It bridged the connecting cultures, and it was an achievement that opened the Hebrew Scriptures to a vast new audience. Our story unfolds in Alexandria, Egypt, during the Hellenistic period, roughly the 3rd or 2nd century BCE. Alexandria was a melting pot, a thriving center of learning, commerce, and cultural exchange. Imagine a city where Greek philosophers mingled with Egyptian traditions, where scholars from across the known world gathered to share ideas. It was a vibrant environment, and this is where the Septuagint emerged. The traditional account of the Septuagint's origins is found in the letter of Arsacides, a fascinating though likely embellished historical document. According to this legend, the Egyptian king Ptolemy II Pheliclides, a great portion of the arts and sciences desired to include the Jewish law, the Torah, and his renowned library. To accomplish this, he commissioned 72 Jewish scholars, 6 from each of the 12 tribes of Israel, to undertake the translation of the Torah into Greek. Now, truth seekers, the legend continues, stating these 72 scholars were isolated on the island of Pharos, working independently. And miraculously, after 72 days, they all produce identical translations. Now, seekers, while this story is certainly compelling and emphasizes on divine inspiration attributed to the translation, it's probably more symbolic than it is strictly historical. It's a bit like having a legendary origin story. It's designed to highlight the importance and the authority of the text. The more probable historical scenario is that the translation of the Hebrew Bible into the Greek was a gradual process, carried out by multiple scholars over several decades, perhaps even several centuries, maybe even more. It wasn't a single unified effort, but rather a collection of individual translations that were eventually compiled. This more nuanced perspective doesn't diminish the Septuagint's significance. It simply acknowledges the complex human element involved in its creation. So here's the question. Why Greek? Why was this language chosen for such an important undertaking? Well, after Alexander the Great's conquest, Greek had become the known lingua franca of the time. It was the language of trade, diplomacy, culture, and intellectual disclosures. Many of the Jewish communities living outside of Judah had adopted the Greek as their primary language, and they needed a Greek version of their scriptures to maintain their religious identity and practice their faith. It was like needing a map or a guidebook to the local language when you travel abroad. Without them, you're likely going to get lost, both literally and figuratively. The Septuagint was a mere word-for-word translation. It involved interpretation and adaptation to both the Greek language and cultural context. This ultimately led to some differences compared to the original Hebrew. And this is where things get particularly interesting for us truth seekers. For example, the Hebrew word Bereshit, which begins in the book of Genesis, is commonly translated as "in the beginning." It can have slightly different nuances depending on the context. The Septuagint translated as "in arche," which also means "in the beginning." But this Greek phrase carries connections influenced by Greek philosophical concepts about the nature of the time of creation. It's a subtle but significant difference, illustrating the translations involve choices that can subtly shape interpretations. One of the small changes that was made between the Hebrew and the Greek Septuagint was the name of God. Throughout the Hebrew text, the name of God is Yahweh. But throughout the Greek Septuagint, they changed the name to Kryos, which is in placement of the name Lord. Another key difference lies in the order of the books. The Septuagint arranges the books differently than it does in the traditional Hebrew Bible. The arrangement found in the most modern Bibles is that of the traditional Hebrew Bible. Furthermore, the Septuagint includes additional books, often referred to as the Apocrypha or Deuterocanonical books, which are not part of the Jewish canon. This difference in canon is one of the key distinctions between the Catholic and the Protestant Bibles, and it is a direct result of the Septuagint's influence. The Septuagint became the Bible of the early church, especially for the Greek-speaking Christians. In fact, most of the Old Testament quotations found in the New Testament are taken directly from the Septuagint. This means the Septuagint played a crucial role in shaping early Christian theology and the understanding of Hebrew Scriptures. It was the lens in which early Christians understood the prophecies and promises of the Old Testaments in relation to Jesus. And this sets the stage for our next topic, the Dead Sea Scrolls. We've explored the need for translation, examined the groundbreaking work of the Septuagint. Now we need to turn our attention to a discovery that dramatically reshaped our understanding of the Bible and its transmission. The Dead Sea Scrolls. This wasn't just the finding of old manuscripts. It was like stumbling upon a time capsule, a direct link to the world of the Bible. Let me take you back. The year is 1947. The world is still recovering from the devastation of World War II. Hidden within these clay jars, carefully sealed away and preserved in the dry climate of Judea for over 2 millennia, were hundreds of ancient scrolls. These weren't just any scrolls, they were the Dead Sea Scrolls, a collection of texts dating back from 3rd century BCE to 1st century CE. This discovery was the archaeological find of the century, and the archaeological sensation, a treasure trove of ancient writing that offered an unprecedented glimpse into the world of the Old Testament. The scrolls contain portions of nearly every book of the Hebrew Bible, including fragments of the Torah and the prophets and their writings. But they also include other texts, like the Apocryphal works and the sectarian documents of the Essenes, a Jewish group who believed to be living in the settlement of Qumran. It was like finding a hidden library, a collection of texts that had been hidden and lost into time. Now, I know what you're thinking. Josh, haven't we already gone over the Dead Sea Scrolls? And what does that have to do with translation? Well, they provide copies of biblical texts that were centuries older than any previously known manuscripts. Before the discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls, the primary book used translation was the Hebrew text, and this was used by scholars all over. These only date back to 9th or 10th century CE. The Dead Sea Scrolls pushed our knowledge back by thousands of years. It was like finding the original blueprints of the building only after seeing it and its renovations. This discovery allowed scholars to compare these original versions with the Masoretic text and the Septuagint, which, as we discussed, is the Greek translation of the Hebrew Bible. And what they found was fascinating. There were some variations, some minor like spelling differences or slight changes in wording. Others were more significant, involving different readings of entire verses or even different versions of certain stories. For example, the Dead Sea Scrolls reveal key differences in Scripture. In Isaiah 6:3, the Qumran text adds an extra holy, making it holy, holy, holy. Holy is the Lord, possibly emphasizing on the holiness even more of God, but just adds an example to some of the small changes made in translation. Now, truth seekers, this is where the real work of textual criticism comes in. Textual criticism is a scholarly discipline that seeks to reconstruct the original text of a document by comparing different manuscripts and identifying variations. It's like being a detective, piecing together all these clues to solve a mystery. But in this case, it's the Bible, and the Dead Sea Scrolls provide a treasure trove of new clues. Now, truth seekers, these variations don't mean the Bible is unreliable, or the message has been lost in time. Rather, they show us the dynamic nature of textual transmission over time. They remind us that the Bible wasn't copied perfectly, word for word, across centuries. Scribes were human, and humans make mistakes. But these variations can also demonstrate the remarkable care and dedication that went into preserving these texts. Even with the variations, the core message of the Bible has remarkably been preserved over the time. The Dead Sea Scrolls also shed light on the context in which the Septuagint was created. The existence of multiple Hebrew contextual traditions during the same period as the Septuagint suggests the translators of the Septuagint were working with the Hebrew text and differed in some ways from the text that eventually became the Masoretic text. Now I know that was a lot, but this helps us to understand why there were differences between the Septuagint and the Hebrew Bible that we have today. It's not necessarily that the Septuagint is bad. It's a matter of being a translation other than the Hebrew textual tradition. This sets the stage for our next episode, where we'll explore how these texts eventually compiled into the biblical canon that we see today. Now, as we conclude our exploration of the earliest biblical translations, I hope you've gained a deeper appreciation for the incredible journey these texts have taken. From the very need of a translation arising from the language barriers and cultural diversities to the groundbreaking work of the Septuagint, bridging the gap between the Hebrew and the Greek, and the remarkable insights that are provided by the Dead Sea Scrolls. We have journeyed through centuries of dedicated scholars and the unwavering desire to preserve and transmit these sacred writings. Truth seekers, we have seen how translation is much more than just swapping words. It's about navigating cultural nuances, interpreting ancient concepts, and making choices that can subtly shape our understanding of the text. The Septuagint was born in a vibrant culture, a melting pot of Alexandria. It became the Bible of the early church, influencing the very language and theology of the New Testament. And then there's the Dead Sea Scrolls, hidden for millennia in a desert cave, offered a glimpse into the textual landscape of the time, revealing the existence of multiple Hebrew textual traditions, and enriching our understanding of the Septuagint's context. These ancient voices, these first translations, laid the very foundation for the word that we follow today. They remind us the Bible is not a static book. It's a living document that has been carefully and prayerfully handled by generations of believers. It highlights the importance of textual criticism and the ongoing work of scholars to understand the Bible in its historical language context. But truth seekers, the good news is the story doesn't end here. In our next episode, we'll be moving forward in time. We'll explore how these early texts were eventually compiled into the biblical canon we know today. We'll dive into the process of canonization, the pivotal role of the Vulgate, and the dramatic events of the Reformation, and the ongoing work of modern translators. It's a story of debate, controversy, and the enduring quest to make the Bible accessible to all. Now, truth seekers, as we close today, I want to thank you and ask you to share this with someone who might find it interesting. The purpose of the truth seekers is to build a community of like-minded people who are actually out there seeking God and seeking truth. So I ask you, follow us across one of our several social media platforms. On YouTube, Facebook, and Instagram, we're under the Truth Seekers Institute. If you want to follow us on TikTok or Lemonade, it's the Truth Seeker Chronicles. And of course, anywhere you get your podcast is the Truth Seekers. I ask you to share this with others so that we can continue to grow in our community. And I can continue to bring you more truth. Until next time, stay curious, stay engaged, and as always, stay truthful.